Now, let's get to continuing problems with Oregon's voter registration system run through the Department of Motor Vehicles. They're involved because anytime someone gets a driver's license or ID or renews a driver's license, they're automatically registered to vote if they are a U.S. citizen. Now, last month, the DMV announced on September 13th, 6 weeks after a problem was discovered, that they'd run a check of their system and found 306 people who were automatically registered to vote in error. The DMV kept looking and announced on September 23rd that another 953 people were discovered. The system had automatically registered them to vote again in error. And then yesterday, the DMV announced that another batch had been found totaling 302 records, for a grand total so far of 1,561 people who were registered to vote in Oregon when they are not eligible to vote. So how did this happen? Well, the DMV explained that sometimes when a person went to DMV and used a foreign passport or birth certificate as proof of identity, a worker would accidentally note in the computer system that they had actually presented a U.S. passport or birth certificate. U.S. citizens can, of course, vote. So the system automatically took their name and registered them to vote. People with foreign passports are not U.S. citizens and cannot vote. Let's get some perspective here, by the way. At the end of September, Oregon had just over 3 million registered voters, and we're talking about 1,561 people registered in error. So yes, tiny, teeny, weeny percentage, but I also think it is a very worthwhile number when it comes to the integrity of our voting system and the confidence that we all have in that system. Now, I had a great chance today to interview the administrator of the DMV, that's Amy Joyce, and started off with a question right along those lines.
What's this been like with this continual drip, 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 and knowing that it's impacting some voters' confidence in our system?
Pat, I would not describe it as a drip, drip, drip. The initial file of 300, I believe it was 306. We were transparent that that was not the end of it, that was the initial, and we were going to be continuing to do analysis. And so then the additional records came out, adding up to the 1,259 about, I think it was 10 days later. So in very quick order. Based on an intensive work from the agency to review a lot of files. And then we believed at that point that was that we'd found what we were going to find. Unfortunately and transparently, as we put in the after action report, we did have those 2 additional issues that came up that we was unfortunate, and we put those out. So that's where we are today. And I wouldn't describe it as a drip, but I understand why you're describing it that way.
Well, it's just that, yeah, as soon as we try and reassure people that, hey, they're on this and what you've seen is what you get, and from here on, it's great. And then there's another week and it's like, well, actually. So that's my explanation for calling it a drip.
Yeah, no, I understand. I was waiting. I couldn't tell if there was a question there. So, but I understand why you're saying it. Yeah.
Now, one of the new problems we learned about yesterday involves people who live in Oregon but are originally from American Samoa. Our friends at Willamette Week had asked the DMV if they were being registered as U.S. citizens, and the answer was yes. And that is a problem. They are actually U.S. nationals, which is different than citizens and does not carry the right to vote. But since 2016, DMV has been classifying people from American Samoa as citizens, so their information was sent to the automatic voter registration system as well. Administrator Joyce and I talked about that, too.
And how big is that issue going to be? Do you know how many people from American Samoa of voting age are in Oregon and how many have been given voter registration?
I don't have that demographic information, and I don't know how many have been given voter registration. Again, we were able to, we used what we could to try to locate folks who had an indication that they were from American Samoa, and that's how we located those records.
Okay, but it would not be surprising if the number grew.
I'll add that we recognize that we don't have a way to determine the entire universe. And so that's why there is going to need to be some additional communication with those communities to ensure that people are aware of their right to vote when they're U.S. citizens, and also that if they have been registered but are not U.S. citizens, that they should not cast that ballot. So we're going to continue to work on that, particularly with the Oregon Secretary of State Elections Division.
So that's kind of an interesting problem, don't you think? They don't know how many people are in Oregon who were born in Samoa, and they don't seem to know how to figure that out. It also turns out that for the most part, DMV does not keep scanned versions of the documents that someone uses to prove identification.
Do they scan in like whatever form of ID that I'm using and that's held? And that's how you've been able to check all these, is going back and checking the scanned ID that they presented and then what the computer says?
Yeah. So the answer to that is no, Pat. We identify this in the after action report as something that is, to our minds, somewhat problematic. So current law in Oregon is that when you get a real ID, right, which is the sort of travel ID under federal law, when you get a real ID, we are required to scan in your source document. So if you present us a US passport, we scan that in, we have an image, we retain it in our system, okay? For a standard issuance, a non-real ID, we are prohibited from scanning in that information. So this is where we get into, I think there's a description in the after action report or when I testified before House Rules, that what the staff do is they fill out a form that indicates what the person showed to them as their identity document. So they might write US passport or, whatever the thing is onto this form. And then the form is what gets scanned into the system for a standard. Yeah.
But at least you have some sort of a record to compare to later, even though it's not the actual document.
Yeah, that's how the system's supposed to work.
Okay, so with me so far, Oregon has discovered more than 1,500 people who were accidentally registered to vote who should not be registered. The state has told county clerks, by the way, to remove those people from the voter rolls. I also wanted to ask about the big picture of how this all went undiscovered for so long. So I quoted findings from the state's after action report on the incident.
And then finally, just a question about accountability. The after action was a bit severe, saying frontline staff not adequately trained on the importance accuracy, also on why it's critical for reliability to get it right every time. DMV did not undertake a process of review or audit of records to determine if the process was working as intended. Who is accountable to that? And will anyone be held accountable because of that?
Yeah. So let me start by saying this. All of those things in the after action report are true. They're transparent, and I think they are forthright about what went wrong here. That isn't, we didn't soften anything in terms of what went wrong here. To me, this is a culture issue more, certainly that we have these mechanical issues that were done incorrectly, but this is an issue of culture, of ensuring that people understand the importance of this element of a DMV transaction. Our staff understand it and how critical it is to get that important. I think I, as the DMV administrator, I'm largely accountable for that, and I accept that and acknowledge it.
Amy, just one other question. You've been there since 2020. I think maybe a lot of the public would be wondering, why wasn't there any audit? Why didn't you guys look harder at this earlier?
Yeah. Yeah, I joined as DMV administrator, and I think it was November of 2020. So I have been there ever since the start of, again, that 1/1/21 date, the driver licenses for all, that sort of changed how we did this process. Absolutely. I mean, in hindsight, absolutely, we should have been reviewing this, looking at it. We exist to serve Oregonians, and we have focused on customer service. We have focused on serving a whole lot of customers. But this is a place where the focus needed to be also on quality and accuracy. And in hindsight, absolutely, we should have been looking at this.
Was there just an assumption that it was such a good program that there was probably very little to find, even if you did do an audit?
I don't think there was an assumption, Pat. I think I'm just going to say, I think in hindsight, we should have done a review.
Okay, so there you go, a deep dive on the DMV voter registration issue. Now, what are your thoughts on this? Send us an email, will you? The address is thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090.